Welcome to a new Life in France. This is section 2 of our UK special. If you haven't seen section 1, please go and have a look at it. It is there. So the first section of this particular program, the first one was really going through everything you need to think about if you're going to make that move from getting a visa to your property, etc., etc. Today's is actually talking about property, and when we talk about the property, we're going to talk about typically the types of property that those from the UK on average will buy, and also everything that's involved with a property. Section 3 is actually giving you a sample of some properties across the price ranges, and also just measuring it against what you could buy in the UK for the same type of money. So we're going to dive straight into buying a property in France. Typically, you are going to be probably buying in the west, southwest or south of France. Typically, that's where a UK person is likely to move to. In terms of the property, you are either going to be looking at a renovation property. The Brits really like a renovation property. They like a bit of a bargain and they like some value for money. That seems to be quite common here in France, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Others, you might be looking for a rural property, and again it's that rural little where you've got a little bit of land, either a big garden or a couple of fields or a bit bigger. So something like that, a nice rural property, most likely to be detached with a bit of land. Some of those rural properties might have a pool, some might not. You might put an above pool in if you want, but equally things that go with it. Others might be looking for a town property. In terms of a town property, it could be a smaller village stroke town, or a town or a bigger town or city. It's unlikely to be a large city. Most people from the UK will not be moving into a big city. It doesn't seem to be the way that it is. Now, some of you might, and that's great, nothing wrong with that, but on the whole, that's not. So most people will look for a town property. They might be swayed by a town property that's got lots of characters, got a little hint of medieval times. It might be in a lovely little square. It might be down by a river, but it's in a town. And the advantages of a town are you can walk to all of your amenities, and that's what a lot of people like, and they also like that community feel. They do like that walk to the boulangerie in the morning to get your bread and bring it home. That's what it's all about. That's what France is all about. But also as well, you might just be looking in terms of the kind of place it is. Is it quite a quiet town but it's still got the amenities, or is it a town that's a bit buzzy, got a little bit more going on it, and that might be a touristy type place. But remember, if it's touristy, it's really busy in the summer, it's probably that much quieter in the winter. But typically that's what people would be looking for. You will also then get some people who want to have something on the coast, might actually be on a coastal, but again it's probably from a town perspective or from something slightly more rural. But in our experience and seeing what's sold and understanding the market really well across France, most of the time a renovation, a rural property or a townhouse. Those are the three types that there will be. Now, that can be a massive variation in terms of costs, what comes with it, the land, what you need to do to it. It is huge. Some people will buy much larger houses. Some people will buy chateaus. Some people will buy farms. Some people will buy businesses. Some people will buy B&Bs or a gîte complex. They will. But that's a smaller amount of people do that, but they still do that. When you're buying your property, you need to think about what do you actually want out of a property, how close you want to be to things. Things can be shops and all the amenities, things to give you things. It's also about being close to motorway links, airports, railways, the UK. You need to think about those things as well. If you've moved to France and you have no ties at all in the UK, you might be less worried about that. But on the whole, most people have got some kind of family or friends that they'll still stay in touch with. They will still go to the UK on occasions or more frequently. You see people probably with grandchildren who are in the UK of a younger age. those people will frequently go back to the UK. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to think about that when you are making that move. What you also need to think about is actually when you buy that property, if you're doing a renovation, you will be spending money. That is for sure. When you're spending money, think about where you're going to spend that money. Are you going to be employing trades? Are you going to do some yourself? Where are you going to get the materials from? Where are you going to hire things? They again will have an impact on you and what you spend. What again people need to also think about is, particularly with a rural property, is your services. Is what is your cooker going to run off? Because you're unlikely to have mains gas outside. So you're going to have to think about gas and gas bottles. What you might also think about as well is electricity, of course. You might also then look at solar. And again, there are planning things that go along around with that, but you could look at solar and that could give you the ability of that. You also then need to think about waste. So you will have water. Most of the time you're going to have water, but you also need to think about septic tanks. Fosse septic tanks as they are in France. When you think about those, that costs money. Some properties will have them. Are they up to date is a question you need to ask. If not, you need to cater for the cost of a septic tank. They do now come in with fines if you don't put them in. The fines actually are not that huge, but you will still get that. So you will be encouraged, and you will have to look in most cases at putting a septic tank in. Again, talk to experts or talk to us and we can help you with that to get the right people to put them in, but it is not a small cost. Roofs. Roofs are super important in a property in France. You need a roof on there. The structure of a French property, particularly a rural property, could actually be based on soil. It could have been there 200 years. It could be still based on soil. If water gets in, it causes all sorts of problems. So you need to make sure your roof is together. If your roof is not together, it is going to cost you money to get a roof on, particularly if you've bought a lovely rural property with a big roof. It's going to cost money. Be aware of that. You also need to think about planning. You need to talk about planning in terms of what you want to do. Most of the time to do with windows. There are lots of other planning things, but just generally you need to think about windows. If you are putting in new windows, or you are taking out, say, doors and you're putting windows in, if you're taking out barn doors and putting windows in, if you're putting in skylights as a window, think about it. There will be planning implications that are there. Most of your planning and your questions should be done through the local mairies, so the local mayor. You would go to their office and ask more. Sometimes then, as part of the planning, it will then be escalated to the department or a city, wherever it is in the area. Again, find it out in your local area, go to the mairies and ask the questions. They'll help you and tell you. Also engage with professionals who can help you. But again, there will be costs. Some people, when they buy properties in the UK, well, not some, but when you do it in France, having a structural survey is very uncommon. In the UK, pretty much most of the time it's very common, and actually it's part of your mortgage. So you have to have it done, whereas in France, it is not that common. There are structural surveyors out there and you can get them. If you're concerned, get them in. Artisans. There's a lot of chat about French artisans. They go, oh, well, the French this and the French that. Actually, do you know what? What I like about France is France as a socialist country. You have plasterers who plaster. You have roofers who do roofing. You don't have as many general building type companies that you would have in the UK. That's quite uncommon. And actually, you will always find bad French workmen and you will always find bad British workmen. You're just going to. But equally, you will find great French workmen and great British workmen as well here in France. You ask around, find recommendations. If somebody says, oh, I can be with you next week, that should be alarm bells, unless they've just had a very quick break and it's a bit of luck, but that's very, very unusual. Most good artisans, craftspeople, builders, that type of people you're going to be asking to work on your house, you're going to have to expect to wait. You really are. What you also need to think about as well is upkeep of your garden. In France, things grow super quick. Don't ask me why. It's so different to the UK, but it is. The climate, particularly when you get rain and heat and rain and heat and heat and heat and heat, you will find weeds in particular grow super fast. So does the grass. You need to be aware of that, and it's great having all this space and all this. You've got to maintain it and look after it, so you need to think about that as well. So there are so many different things to think about, and this whole thing about you from the UK moving to France, I'm not putting you off, I'm just trying to say think about all these different things you need to think about before you make those next steps. Let's think a little bit more now about the amenities that you need. You know, you need to think about your local shops, you need to talk about DIY things, you need to think about other things like dentists and doctors in rural France. It's a big thing to think about. Actually, we have seen a decrease in doctors in rural areas and actually an increase in the demand for them. You will find yourself a lot of the time on a waiting list, or you will be having to go to find a doctor who's probably a good hour away, and that's not uncommon. You just need to be aware of that. More towns and cities, you will find a little bit more of a supply, but rural areas it's very difficult. The same with dentists as well, will have the same problems. The big cities, the big towns will have emergency dentists. You probably will find you will be using those on occasions because it's very difficult to get in with a dentist. It's extremely difficult to get in with an English-speaking dentist or an English-speaking doctor. It is. Now, I'm not saying it's not impossible, it isn't, but you need to think about that in terms of this whole moving to France. It's not a negative, you just need to be aware that you can cope with that to be able to do that. So you do need to think about those things that come in with that. Another thing people talk about as well is opticians. The way that opticians work in France is very different to the UK. In the UK, you go into the opticians, get your eye tested, give you a prescription, they can sort your contact lenses or your glasses out. It's a one-stop shop, you know, Specsavers, etc., Vision Express, they all do that. France is super different. France, you go into the opticians, but you need to have had your prescription before. You need to go to your doctors to get a prescription. From there, you need to go and actually see the eye specialist who gives you the proper prescription. Then you go to the opticians. That is pretty much what it is 90% of the time. So you need to be aware of that in the way it works and everything else. You also need to think about timings in France. So most of the rural France, and again, I'm just talking the generalistic areas that people will go to. Most of the shops are going to be closed in that lunchtime. They just are. The odd shop will be open, but most are closed. The bigger supermarkets will be open, but your smaller local shops are going to be closed. A lot of the times on a Monday, most of France will be shut. On a Sunday, you've really only got that opportunity in most cases from 9 till about 12:30 to get what you want. Go into the bigger cities, then more things are open, like the DI ones are open longer. But France is, you know, it still likes that Sunday trading, and it's not the level that you would expect in the UK. And that's the same about shops being open late. You won't find that in the rural areas of France and the rural towns. The bigger cities, you will find things open late, but don't expect the kind of things you would be used to in the UK. Don't be used to takeaways. Don't be used to being able to go into Tesco's at midnight and get what you want and run in and get out. And also don't expect to get into a supermarket before 8:30 in the morning. You might get into a local smaller shop before then, but just don't expect it. That's not the way of life that's here in France. Bigger cities is slightly different, but actually in the most part it's not. So just be aware of those kind of things. So when you're looking for your property, think about the key things. You know, you're going to be looking at a renovation, or you're going to be looking at a rural property that could be renovation already done. Are you then looking maybe for a town type property? Outside that, there are all of the other different things. France can offer you so much, and it's all about value for money and what you get. Particularly if you get a second home, you might have sold up in the UK, bought something smaller, and you've got some money to invest in France. Perfect. Think about where you're going to go. What we also then look at as well is you can look at sort of the spends. The way that the people from the US, those US citizens, they have a little bit more disposable income, they have a little bit more money to spend, and they're slightly different areas to where most of the expats are in the UK as well coming into France. So sort of think about that. It's not a problem, it's just about that's the reality of what happens and the way that it works. This was section 2, just opening your eyes a little bit more to the property, and actually when you have your property, what's around the area and locations and amenities and everything else like that. The next in the series, we're actually going to be giving you 3 or 4 properties and then match them up against something in the UK to give you a feel for the value of money of what is going on. If you're enjoying this, remember in the comments that are there, we've got the description, there will be downloads that you can go in. You can go to anewlifeinfrance.com to our website to be able to see more as well, and there's a lot more downloads. And we ourselves as a team are here to help you with any of your questions and actually help you on that journey. Again, subscribe below so you will always get alerted when we bring something out. We're bringing something each and every week. We have lots of episodes that are there. So if you've followed so far, you will have seen section 1, this is section 2, and section 3 will be where we actually look at some properties.